Blog Talk Radio.
Are you ready to take a bite out of the competition? Are you looking for ideas to make your business better? Welcome to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. At the core of every successful business, you'll find people making a difference. And with each episode of the Core Business Show, we talk with those people, examine those ideas, and explore the strategies that make them special. Now, the host of the Core Business Show, Tim Jacquet.
Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Core Business Show. It's Tim Jacquet, your host. I'm getting ready to play. It's going to be a rebroadcast from last week's episode, the Ministry of Priesthood. A lot of people found really fascinating. So by request, I'm going to go ahead and play this again. And this is with Father Leon Strider, who is a associate professor at St. Mary's Seminary in Houston, Texas. He has a doctorate in theology. So again, this is Father Leon Strider, rebroadcast on the Ministry of the Catholic Priesthood.
Well, Father Leon, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess to begin with, kind of tell our listening audience about yourself. And I already introduced you as the associate professor there at St. Mary's Seminary. And I guess just to start on this journey, kind of tell us what brought you in the priesthood and how you became to teach, or something that's about yourself you don't mind.
Oh, of course, no problem. Well, I'm a Texan. I grew up here in Texas, and I'm rather one of a dying breed. I went to the college seminary right after high school. And so I came to seminary here in Houston, and amongst various things, I ended up with a degree in classics because I thought I wanted to maybe do some scripture studies. And then I went to Rome, and I fell in love with liturgical studies, liturgy and sacraments and that sort of thing. And so that's where I've been studying the rest of my priesthood. I'm a priest of the Diocese of Austin. There's 15 dioceses, Catholic dioceses in Texas, and I'm a priest of Austin. So my first assignments were Hispanic ministry. Then I did campus ministry, and then I started doing seminary work about 21 years ago, 1990. Went back to Rome and finished my doctorate on the promise of obedience in ordination rites, and that's actually a book somebody can buy if they wish. And I've been here at the seminary for 21 years, teaching liturgy, sacraments, classical languages, and that sort of thing. So I've been a priest now almost 36 years, and so that's kind of me in a nutshell. A Texan with a classical background, love of languages because I'm fluent in Italian, Spanish, and German, and and I teach Greek and Latin, and so that's why I'm a little bit of a unique bird, because most people don't have the opportunity for such a liberal arts education. So that's what I am and what I sort of do.
Great. I really appreciate that, the introduction. I guess let's go ahead and dive right into it regarding the Ministry of Priesthood. A lot of, as I explained before we came on the air, a lot of our listeners just really curious regarding the priesthood itself, the institution. And if you can enlighten our audience to talk about that ministry, how did it come to be, and talk about through the history, when they want the main question, why priests don't marry, and
sure.
And then we can later segue into your book, The Promise of Obedience.
Well, I would start with simply saying that priesthood or ministry is a calling, it's a vocation. And working in seminary, one of the things we try to do is to discern whether someone actually has a call or just thinks they have a call. Because I've had a great time, and still am having a great time being a priest, but it's a lot of hard work, or it should be, but it has to be work that's done with joy, and so you can't just sort of do it part-time. That just doesn't work. So it's first of all a call, and it has to come from God. That's where I would start.
Okay.
And we sort of base it on the call of the 12 apostles, that Jesus called 12, and then he also sent 70 or 72, depending on your reading of that passage. And this idea of being called and being sent, with Paul and then Barnabas and Silas and all those people in the New Testament, is still our paradigm, what we base our call upon and our service. And we're sent to serve, not to be served, as Christ so eloquently put it. So that's what we try to do. So just to put a few theological terms, there's that sense of vocation, a sense of apostolicity, that it's connected to the apostles and the establishment of the church from Jesus' call to Pentecost and all that has come from that. You mentioned the whole idea of a celibate priesthood. Now, historically, well, let's start with the New Testament. There's that famous passage that says that at least some of the apostles were married, because we have the famous healing of Peter's mother-in-law. And what some people don't like about that passage is that after Jesus healed her, she got up and served the apostles, but it was her house. So anyways, she was the maitre d' and the matron of that house. And so there's that sense that the apostles even left wives and, I suppose, children to follow the Lord. But in the early church, and of course they talk about bishops also being the husband of one wife in the pastoral epistles. But in the early church, seemingly there was both. There were married ministers and there were celibate ministers. And that seemed to have been the paradigm up for the first 1,000 years. And it still is so in the East. The Orthodox and other Eastern rites have a married priesthood, and out of the celibate priests, the bishops are come. They're called from the monasteries. But in the West, that would be Europe, and Europe, of course, has flown. Europe is the paradigm that we use for the Americas because they evangelized us. We have this stronger sense of a celibate priesthood for the last 1,000 years. It's a complicated subject, but for the most part, it was actually based on the idea of being free to serve, being free to be sent. And then there were two complicating circumstances. One was the idea if you had children, then there was the issue of inheritance, that the son of a priest could inherit that parish. And that isn't always the best way of going. And the second issue was purity for communion, the idea of connecting the sacrifice of the Eucharist with the purity before receiving it was also strong in marriage, that people were encouraged not to be sexually intimate with their spouse the night before receiving communion. And so all those sort of things, and I'm putting it very simply, sort of came together.
Sure.
The emphasis then was on a celibate priesthood. Now, just to bring it up to date, when the Reformation churches started, almost all of them went to a married ministry, married sort of priesthood, but they didn't use the word priesthood. And today, actually, one of the things I'm working on before and after I'm speaking with you and all your listeners is, people may have heard that there's a fairly large group of American Episcopalians or Anglicans who are joining the Roman Catholic Church. Amongst them, about 40 to 60 former Episcopal priests, and they wish to be ordained Roman Catholic priests. And we here in Houston have been given the charge of preparing them. And so they come with their wives and with their children, and we have a few already who have joined us over the last 20, 30 years. And so it's a whole new way of looking at things. So that's the whole picture in a short, breathless nutshell. So
thank you for your explanation of that. Going back to the Anglican priest that's coming into the Catholic Church, are they going to be part of maybe teaching, or are they going to be actually assigned to a parish? How is that going to actually segue into the ministry with the Catholic Church?
Well, let me rush in to say, and this is kind of unfortunate, but it's part of the reality, is finances are always a question. And in justice, these men need a salary greater than, say, I would need, because they do have family, they have a wife, often children in college, and I don't need to mention how expensive college can be. And so one of the issues is to find them positions where the salary is just for them. And so, yes, some, if they have the degrees, might find a position in teaching and be paid a professor's salary, although that's not so great either, but it's a lot more than what a regular priest gets. Some of them will join the military or are part of the military. The chaplains are paid a bit more. But that's one of the big questions, is how can we find positions for them that would offer a salary that is just. And I think I would be correct in saying that that's still to be worked out. There's a lot of goodwill, but goodwill doesn't pay the bills, as they say. So the issue is that we have more men who want to be ordained priests than we have Anglican usage. That's what they're still calling them, parishes, Anglican ordinary parishes for them. So many of them will have to find positions in a Roman Catholic parish, and that's still to be worked out. So, as they say, stay tuned.
Well, yeah, what's so good about it, I just had this conversation with several people last week. We were talking about how the parishes have grown beyond music. But if we go back 20 years ago, we didn't have parishes. Maybe 2,000 was probably the max. But if you notice, within the last 15 years or so, from the mid-'90s, we have humongous parishes that, even in Houston, that have like 10,000 families, which are in the sense of mega churches.
We have another term for that. We call them killer churches. They're too
killer
big.
Churches.
They just you just go from one crisis to another, and even though you hire as great a staff as you can, it is still overwhelming. Absolutely overwhelming. Yes.
Yeah, and it's not like by design. It just happens. Either it's two things: we're ministering to the people extremely well, and they just come into the church in droves. But, we didn't see these things in the mid-'90s at all. I mean, it's just within the last 15 years that these churches just have exploded. I remember just turn of the 2000s, our largest church probably was about 5,000 to 6,000 families. And now that is becoming the norm where churches are. So even taking that into account, now you have these larger churches with larger budgets and larger salaries. I guess that can be more of a dialogue because they have more resources for some of them to kind of work out a package that they could go into a parish somewhere in the future. But, it's just for us who's been in the church for over 30 years, to see the growth is just amazing. Going back to the Anglican Church, how is that connected to our church, and they are allowed to come into the church as Catholic priests? Is that open to any other religion, or is just that particular denomination?
Well, the answer is it depends. I have personally worked with and helped to train Lutheran and Methodist ministers who wanted to become Catholic priests. There was one nice Methodist priest from Oklahoma who, I don't know how many years ago, his bishop sent him down here once a month, and so I had him for a whole weekend talking through all kinds of things, and so we did the best we could. So I personally know of Methodists and Lutherans, but there has been no major movement where the whole parish might come over. Amongst the Anglicans, the Episcopalians, there are, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 parishes, small parishes, maybe 60 to 200 people max, who have also decided to join us. And so, but those are still very few. We have, of course, one here in Houston. There's one in San Antonio, 1 or 2 up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, 1 in Maryland, and I'm not sure about others, but where there's a small parish that has come over as well. But the major issue there, or the major connection, is that Episcopalian rituals are exceedingly similar to Catholic rituals. So it's fairly easy in one sense to bridge the gap. The difficulty is maybe some of the language. There are some people who enjoy a much more classical sort of English than perhaps most Americans are used to. So that, as they say, is still yet to be worked out.
Okay.
So, but the issue is that many Anglo-Catholics, Episcopalians of high church understanding, feel very much at home, even in a Roman Catholic ritual. So that's the connection. So,
wow.
Yeah. This is a whole new chapter, and it's sort of exciting to watch how these things will work out.
Great. We have a question from the chat room. They're asking about, can a priest be... he has a long phrase here. I'm guessing what he's getting at, can that person also become a pope or a bishop? And how does that process normally work as being a pope or a bishop in order to become a bishop or a pope in the church?
Is he talking about a typical Roman Catholic, or he's talking about a married priest from the Anglican?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sure he's talking about the Catholic priest.
Okay, so that's a different question. Okay. Well, let's try to put that in a nutshell. Every time that there is an opening for a bishop, whether the top bishop, the ordinary of a diocese, or an auxiliary bishop, the local bishops send in what's called a terna, T-E-R-N-A, which is a list of 3 names that goes through the nuncio that's up in Washington, and that he then sends it to Rome, and various committees look at it, and then the list comes back. It can be shifted, it can be completely changed, and then they ask the first name on the list, will you accept to be bishop of such and such a place? And so that's sort of how that goes. It's very much a secretive affair. Letters do go out on these names to various people, people who would be in the know, to comment on various names, and all that is sworn to secrecy. So that's how one becomes a bishop. Then certain bishops, of course, become cardinals, like our own cardinal here in Houston, Daniel DiNardo, or everybody's been watching Tim Dolan in New York, the new cardinal there in New York, and other places. And there's about 120 cardinals under the age of 80 who are able to vote for a pope. So when a pope dies, and the new possibility is whether or not, if Benedict feels that it's the right thing, if a pope could resign for reasons of health. I mean, he's still moving pretty good, but he's also 80, he'll be 85 in April. So, my gosh, how much can you expect of a man? So, that's a whole other question. That's only been done a few times in history, and that was a long time ago that a pope would resign. But I guess popes can do whatever they wish. That's the beauty. So when there's need for a new pope, those cardinals under 80, as the famous movies show, go into the Sistine Chapel, etc., and again in secrecy, they 2/3 have to vote for one person, and they ask if he accepts, and as I say, the rest is history. So that, in a nutshell, is sort of how that goes. What I was going to add is that amongst the Anglicans who are joining us, only a celibate Anglican could ever be ordained a bishop. So, like the East, only the monks are ordained bishops. So that's sort of where that tradition is. So I thought he was asking that question. So, for example, the ordinary of the Anglicans here in the United States, he's my neighbor. He's next door to me, his office. He was an Episcopal bishop, became, of course, a Roman Catholic priest. His doctorate is from Oxford. He's a patristics professor. And he's the ordinary, but he's not a bishop because he has a wife and family. So, and likewise, the one in England, the ordinary of the ordinariate in England is also a married former bishop who is the ordinary, but as a priest, not as a bishop. By ordinary, I mean he has all the powers, but he can't ordain. So he assigns people, he gives faculties, he deals with all the issues. So.
Okay. Now,
people wanted to know, but that's how it goes.
No, actually, it really helps. When you mention inheritance, how does that normally work? They place in a particular environment. You mentioned earlier about inheritance.
Yeah, in the Middle Ages, of course, parishes were sometimes called benefices. There was land, there was a church. They probably had fields and such to make a little money to support it. They had the buildings, of course, the church building and other things. And or sometimes that land belonged to the local noble, the local lord, and the priest that he would have working for him would be living there. And then the question would be, when the priest died, well, who would come and take the property? And sometimes it was the priest's son. So that's how that all goes. And so it was another time. Now, Anglican parishes, Episcopal parishes, as well as Roman Catholic parishes, belong to the local diocese. So there's no more, priests do not own the churches that they're serving in.
Okay. One question on Twitter, they was asking about the hierarchy of the church. Of course, you have popes, you have cardinals. Cardinals vote for popes. His question, I guess, he's getting at, how is that structure from cardinal to archbishop to priest, a monsignor, and what is a monsignor? So is that really how the matrix work? You have the pope, of course, and you have cardinals underneath, and you have... Okay.
Let me sort of, I guess, go from the top down. Cardinals are actually priests of Rome. So every cardinal is given a parish there in Rome, because the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, and he is supposedly elected by the priest of Rome. Of course, they're cardinals from all over the world, but that's that old connection. A cardinal is an archbishop, and an archbishop is a metropolitan. He has a bigger area. Like here in Texas, we have two, Houston and San Antonio. Everybody knows about New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, Miami, Atlanta. All of those are archbishoprics. And so there's an archbishop who has a bigger territory of several dioceses. And each diocese has a bishop. And many dioceses that are big have auxiliary bishops, but they're all bishops. So auxiliary bishops, archbishops, cardinals, they're all bishops. And that's their basic sacramental tie. Now, below that you have priests, and their major position, of course, is pastor. They are head of a parish. And then you have parochial vicars or associate pastors who work in a parish. And they're all priests. Now, Monsignor is an interesting sort of title. A Monsignor is better known as a papal chamberlain, or someone who works for or who is an honorary member of the papal household. That's where the chamberlain comes from. So a Monsignor is really an honorary title that some priests have. And they get to wear purple and look a little bit like a bishop, but they're not bishops. So a Monsignor is an honorary title for a member of the papal household for certain priests who have done well or who are in positions of power. So that's that sort of delineation.
Okay. And playing a part of brothers and sisters of the church, do they have any type, are they connected the same way, or they're kind of subdivision orders of the Catholic Church? How do they play a part in this whole matrix?
Are you talking about
religious orders, sisters, monks, brothers?
Okay. Again, there's basically two levels there. On the level of the orders themselves, both men and women take the evangelical vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and those vows are what they hold as most important. Most of the male orders have their men ordained priests. Not all, but most. It's a whole lot more now than it used to be. It's really hard to find brothers anymore, which I think is kind of a shame. But anyway, so most religious men are also priests. And so they can also serve as pastors. They obviously celebrate the sacraments, say Mass, baptize, and such. So they're a part of that. But they are their own unique. They have their own unique charism, and their provincials have powers in terms of faculties and all that sort of thing. And so when a religious priest comes into a diocese, he is sent there by his provincial, and then he's given a position by the local bishop, so they have to work it out.
Okay.
And there's a long history of that. So,
okay, and
many of them do, of course, teach, and that's a whole other ministry. And so you'll have big old schools with lots of Jesuits, Dominicans, or Augustinians, or whatever. And but all of them serve at the permission of their own leader, their provincial, and the local bishop.
Okay. Great. I think they're asking. Okay, and assuming that's why they have certain orders in a diocese that is assigned to certain parishes, because the local parish doesn't have enough staffing to staff every single church. Like, for example, your particular diocese, you have 200 churches, and to place someone at every single church within that diocese would be real difficult full time. So they go out and allow other orders to come in to help manage the churches. Right. Okay. If we segue into the premise of being as your book itself, can you talk about your book? It's published by Liturgical Press, in connection to the Ministry of Priesthood. Can you tell us about that book and where we can get it, and really just a summary about the book?
Well, it's my doctoral dissertation, but I tried to write it in such a way that it's readable. Anyway, I'll leave that up for people to decide. But it is just a history of in ordination rites for deacons, priests, and bishops. There are different types of promises of obedience, and I just wanted to study how those developed and what their relationship also was to the vow of obedience that religious take, and because that flows out of that medieval time when you had lords and you had serfs or fiefs, and it was a bit more mutual back then, that a priest or a bishop would declare obedience to the local lord, and the lord would say, I'll take care of you from any other lords that might want to come and take over property or churches or whatever. So there was this sense of feudalism that was for everybody's benefit. And then that sort of evolved into a more ecclesial structure where priests would profess obedience to the local bishop, and the bishop was then free to send them wherever he needed them, which, of course, has many advantages. So it just sort of surveys the history of how those vows of obedience developed, how they changed in their wording, and also deals with some of the issues between diocesan priests and religious priests when it comes to who they are obedient to. Because, as I mentioned earlier, a religious has his own boss, his provincial, then he has the local bishop. And all of that has to be worked out in, hopefully, in goodness and charity. So that's what it's about.
Okay. We have one, I'll take this last question from Twitter regarding deacons, the deacon role in the church. I guess they're asking, under the same matrix, what is the deacon's role in the Catholic?
Well, very quickly, historically, there were deacons in the early church, some of them quite famous, like, Stephen and the Book of Acts and such. Then they sort of died out a little bit and became just a step on the way to priesthood. And I think one of the beauties of the Second Vatican Council was it brought back the diaconate. And so since the 70s and certainly 80s, many dioceses in the United States have been training men, most of them married, if not all of them, almost all of them are married, to be trained and ordained as permanent deacons who will stay deacons for the rest of their lives. On one hand, we need what they can do because they're trained, they can preach, they can baptize, witness marriages, do funerals, and that sort of thing. On the other hand, they remind us of what a deacon and diaconate truly means, which is service, that we are a deaconal church. We're a church of service. So when I teach deacons, I always remind them that they have to remind all of us that we're called to serve. And most of them are just good men who have a lot on their plate, but they are willing to add a little more in order to serve the many needs in the church. And as you mentioned earlier, with these huge parishes, they become a great help. And so that's the importance of the diaconate.
Okay. My last question, before we kind of do a summary, you mentioned at the very top of the show regarding the people coming in regarding the call, or they think they have the calling. What type of process do you guys normally go through, or kind of help does the person discern, is this a calling for me, or you think you have this calling? Is a process you guys work out to say, hey, this is your calling or this is not your calling, or how do you as a staff kind of discern that process for a young man coming in or coming into the church and I think they have the calling or they don't have the calling?
Well, the first place I was started, we have a directory for priestly formation, which talks about the 4 pillars. And I think it's important to keep those pillars in mind. It's the human formation, the academic formation, the pastoral formation, and the spiritual formation. Now, academic is the easiest of them because that's classes. And spiritual formation is their own spiritual growth with a spiritual director, and so that's fairly delineated, and those two are rather classic. Pastoral is also fairly easy in the sense that we put them into parishes and we see how they do. The hard one is the human formation. It's to deal with all maybe the dysfunction or the baggage that one might bring, because to answer your question, the bottom line is you have to be happy doing what you're doing. If you're not happy doing what you're doing, then that is an obvious sign that something isn't right. And so we have what we call a pastoral year. So when someone takes a year in a parish, if they don't come back saying, this is great, this is fun, I like what I do, and the people say, he's a good man, and we can sort of sense the goodness of God in him. If we don't have those sort of indicators, then something is not quite right. And so the discernment of the call is, can you be happy doing what the church is going to ask you to do? So,
wow.
And that's why it takes, we have a 5-year program, 4 years of academic, and in the middle is the year in the parish.
And it's in the graduate level.
Yeah.
So, okay. So they still had.
So we're going to take a quick break real quick. I need to reload the broadcast. In the meantime, I'll pay a break from our sponsor. And it's about 7 minutes left on this particular show. So let me go ahead and play a 30-second break from Apple Capital sponsor.
Apple Capital Group in Jacksonville, Florida, is a commercial lender that specializes in asset-based loans, equipment leasing and financing, invoice financing, commercial real estate loans, and asset-based financing in the U.S. and Canada. Apple Capital Group is a direct lender that lends on their private equity investment portfolio. 90% of most loans are decided within 2 hours, and vendor funding within 24 hours after documents are completed, with a 1-page application. No slow no's, just a quick decision and a fast yes. To get more information about lending from Apple Capital Group, call 866-611-7457. That's 866-611-7457 to speak with one of our loan specialists. Or visit us right now at applecapitalgroup.com.
That's why it takes, we have a 5-year program, 4 years of academic, and in the middle is the year in the parish.
And that's in the graduate level.
Yeah.
So, okay. So they still had to get the undergrad degree for that process, and then, okay, no problem. This is a good question here regarding older single men or widowed men. Are they allowed, which I'm assuming the question is yes, if they are single, then in mid-50s or 60s or 70s, are they allowed to go through the same process? And is there a modified program? I guess this question here is because they already have degrees. Does the church still allow them to become priests?
Well, yes. There's no magic cutoff age. Here recently, we ordained a man who was a widower who was 62 when we ordained him. And presently, one of my students has just turned 60. And so, yes, probably after 65 or 70, most people were going to say, well, we ordain you one day and bury you next. We won't get much work out of it. But it's one of those sort of things. And the same thing with the candidates for the permanent diaconate. How old? We 55 is kind of a magic age to throw out. And if you're 60, well, then let's talk about it. So that's part of it. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
Now, we put them through the program everybody else does. But there are some seminaries throughout the United States that have a modified program. And perhaps the most famous is the ones outside of Milwaukee called Hale's Corner. Hale's Corner.
Okay.
They have specialized in older men, and they shorten everything.
Okay.
So, and there's at least one. There's one in Boston, and there might be another one. But so yes, and some are never married. Some are widowers. Some were married and are now divorced, and they get an annulment, so they're free, as you said, free to come. Now they have to make sure that their children are all taken care of. So we can't have men with dependents. It's just too hard. So,
yeah, so you're saying they have to be at least 18 to really be legal?
Yeah, right.
Okay. I'm assuming that college is the program while they're kids in college, and the college is already taken care of. That's usually another roadblock to them as well, since they are actually adults.
Financially, they have to have that taken care of. Yes.
Sure, absolutely. What do you think you'd like to close with regarding the Ministry of Priesthood?
Well, simply that for the greater majority of priests, while there's a lot to do and there's a sense of being overwhelmed by the sheer size and numbers, there is still a great deal of joy, and that's where I'd like to end this. That people are good, they're kind, and I get to be a part of their greatest joys, sometimes their deepest sorrows, and to celebrate the goodness of God and His love and His life with them. And so, while yes, I wish we had twice or three times the number of priests that we have now. We do the best we can and try to keep sane and keep joyful.
Great. I really appreciate you coming onto the program. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Have a great day. I appreciate it.
I will. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. This has been another production of the Core Business Show with Tim JK. You can download this episode on iTunes, or you can get it from Blog Talk Radio, or also is available on our blog. I will do an outline on blog.apple Capital Group to give you an outline of the show, what Father Leon talked about. And if you have any concern, of course, you can contact your local diocese, a Catholic diocese or any other diocese, or if it's Episcopalian or and so forth, or a local, talk to your local pastor if you're not Catholic, and talk about the process of discerning for the ministry of pastorship or ministry of priesthood or ministry of just being a reverend. So anyway, thank you for joining the program today. Tim JK, the Core Business Show. And again, you can download this on iTunes. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim JK. For a free quote on equipment leasing and financing, visit our website, applecapitalgroup.com. That's applecapitalgroup.com. And fill out the information to receive your free quote. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. And remember, you can always get to the Core via iTunes. You'll find all our previous episodes there. Thanks again for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim JK.